It was a quiet Sunday morning in the suburban neighborhood of Brookfield Estates, the kind of place where lawns were always trimmed and neighbors waved, even if only to judge silently afterward. Birds chirped, sprinklers ticked, and somewhere down the street, jazz music drifted through the air, smooth, warm, and unmistakably alive. On the porch of house number 214, Gary Whitman, a middle-aged white man with a permanent frown and a coffee mug that read HOA Strong, squinted toward the source of the music. Across the street, a moving truck sat in the driveway of house 215. Boxes, laughter, the deep sound of a baritone voice singing along to Louis Armstrong. Gary scowled. "Here we go," he muttered. First weekend in, and already blasting noise. He grabbed his phone, marched inside, and started dialing. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, the street had gone silent except for the hum of their cruiser. The new homeowner, a tall, well-dressed black man in his late 40s, stepped out of his front door, wiping his hands with a rag from unpacking. "Morning, officers," he said calmly, his voice smooth but firm. "Everything all right?" One of the officers glanced at his notepad. "We got a noise complaint, sir. Said there was loud music disturbing the peace." The man chuckled lightly. "You mean the Armstrong record? It's been off for 10 minutes." By now, curious neighbors had peeked out from curtains and porches, Gary among them, arms crossed in self-righteous triumph. "That's him," he called out. "Told you. These kinds of people don't follow community rules." The officer turned. "Sir, please step back." But Gary wasn't finished. "No, I'm not stepping back. This is a quiet neighborhood. We don't need loud parties or—" "Parties?" The black man raised an eyebrow, smiling faintly. "I was unpacking alone," Gary sneered. "Yeah, sure you were. You people always—" The officer cut him off sharply. "Sir, that's enough." Tension hung heavy in the air. The black man's expression stayed calm, unbothered. He reached into his pocket slowly and deliberately and pulled out a leather ID wallet. "Officers," he said, opening it, "I believe you should see this before things go further." The nearest cop leaned closer and instantly straightened up. His face shifted from neutral to stunned. "Sir, Mr. Mayor?" Gasps rippled through the small crowd of neighbors. Gary froze, confusion flickering across his face. "Yes," the man said calmly, his voice carrying across the street. "Malcolm Brooks, mayor of Brookfield, moved in yesterday." He smiled faintly, not out of arrogance, but quiet control. "And I appreciate you coming by. I'll be sure to discuss the efficiency of our local response times at next week's council meeting." The officers exchanged glances, equal parts awkward and apologetic. "Understood, sir. Welcome to the neighborhood." As they got back into their cruiser, Gary stood speechless, color draining from his face. The jazz record inside the mayor's house started again, soft, easy, confident. Malcolm turned toward him, a glint of humor in his eyes. "You should stop by sometime," he said. "We could use more soul around here." Then, without another word, he went back inside, leaving Gary on the curb, coffee mug trembling slightly in his hand, the words strong, now feeling a lot less true. By Monday morning, the story had already traveled faster than the morning paper. Brookfield Estates, the quiet, picture-perfect suburb that prided itself on order and pleasant living, was suddenly buzzing with whispers about the new neighbor who had moved into 215 Maple Lane. Everywhere from the local coffee shop to the HOA group chat, people repeated the same line, almost in disbelief. "Did you hear? The man Gary called the cops on is the mayor." By noon, even the grocery store cashier knew. At first, Gary Whitman tried to downplay the incident. "I didn't know who he was," he barked to anyone who would listen. "The music was loud. I'd have done the same if it was anyone else." But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. He hadn't seen anyone else when he picked up the phone. He'd seen a black man moving into the nicest house on the block and assumed the worst. Meanwhile, across the street, Mayor Malcolm Brooks went about his morning as if nothing had happened. He watered his plants, waved to the mail carrier, and greeted joggers who passed by, some of whom, now knowing who he was, waved back nervously. Inside his kitchen, his wife, Angela, chuckled as she scrolled through her phone. "You've gone viral on the neighborhood app, you know that?" she said. Someone posted, "New mayor meets old prejudice." Over 600 likes. Malcolm smiled faintly, sipping his coffee. "I didn't move here to make headlines," he said. But maybe this neighborhood needed a reminder of what leadership looks like. Angela grinned. Grace under fire, huh? Something like that. Later that afternoon, while Malcolm reviewed city budget proposals in his home office, a knock sounded at the door. He opened it to find three neighbors standing awkwardly on his porch, one holding a pie, another holding a bouquet, and the third clutching a nervous smile. Mayor Brooks, said the woman in front, we just wanted to welcome you properly. We're sorry for how things went down yesterday. That wasn't how this neighborhood should have greeted you. Malcolm's face softened. Apology accepted. And please, call me Malcolm. I'm your neighbor first, your mayor second. The woman smiled, visibly relieved. Well, we hope you'll come to the next HOA meeting. I think a few people could use your perspective. Malcolm nodded, amused. I'll be there. The moment they left, a shadow moved near the sidewalk. It was Gary, pretending to check his mailbox, but very clearly listening. His face flushed as Malcolm's eyes met his. For a long second, neither man spoke. Then Malcolm said calmly, Good afternoon, Mr. Whitman. Gary hesitated. Afternoon. A long pause stretched between them, not angry, but heavy. Then, Malcolm smiled politely. Beautiful day, isn't it? Gary swallowed hard. Yeah, he muttered. Beautiful. That night, the neighborhood app blew up again. Not with complaints, but with praise. Photos of Malcolm talking to local kids, helping an elderly neighbor fix her porch light, even mowing his own lawn. One post read, I misjudged him. He's the kind of leader this neighborhood needs. Gary read it all in silence from his recliner. His wife glanced over his shoulder. You should apologize, Gary, she said softly. He didn't answer, but he didn't close the app either. Across the street, Malcolm sat on his porch, the jazz playing softly again. Not as defiance, but as peace. The same music that sparked anger now filled the evening with calm. He looked up at the quiet, glowing street and said to Angela, Funny how noise becomes harmony once people start listening. She smiled. You always were good with words. Malcolm chuckled. No, he said. I'm just patient. And for the first time since moving in, Brookfield Estates felt just a little more human. 2 days passed before Gary Whitman finally gathered the nerve to walk across the street. For 48 hours, he'd watched the mayor from behind his curtains, greeting neighbors, carrying groceries for an elderly woman, even fixing the loose mailbox at the corner that Gary had been ignoring for months. Every act of kindness made the knot in Gary's stomach twist tighter. The guilt was eating him alive. His wife, Linda, hadn't spoken much since the incident. Not out of anger, but quiet disappointment, which somehow stung worse. That Wednesday morning, Gary stood at his window, clutching a cup of coffee gone cold. Malcolm Brooks was out front watering his flowers again, wearing rolled-up sleeves and an easy smile, as if the entire world hadn't seen Gary make a fool of himself. Linda walked in, crossed her arms, and said simply, Go. Gary turned. What? Go apologize. You were wrong, Gary. And if you don't own it, you'll never live it down. Not with me, not with them, she said, gesturing toward the window, and not with yourself. He sighed, set down the mug, and walked outside. The air was crisp, the kind that made everything sound sharper. The birds, the sprinklers, even his own heartbeat. As he approached, Malcolm looked up and smiled as though they were old friends. Morning, Mr. Whitman, he said warmly. You keeping out of trouble? Gary managed a weak chuckle. Trying to, Mayor. He hesitated, shifting awkwardly. Listen, about the other day. I owe you an apology. Malcolm turned off the hose and leaned against the railing, arms crossed loosely. Go on. Gary swallowed hard. I shouldn't have called the cops. I didn't even try to talk to you first. I just assumed the worst. That was... He stopped, his voice catching. That was wrong of me. Malcolm said nothing, waiting. Gary looked down at the pavement. Truth is, I saw a black man moving into that house and thought, well, I thought maybe the neighborhood was changing. I thought I was protecting something. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. Protecting what? Gary hesitated. I don't even know anymore, he admitted quietly. This street, maybe. Or just my comfort. Malcolm nodded slowly. Comfort can be dangerous, he said. It keeps people from growing. Gary glanced up. You could have humiliated me. Everyone's been talking about it online, and you haven't said a word. Why? Malcolm smiled faintly. Because I didn't move here to embarrass anyone. I moved here to live, same as you. And if I'd met your anger with anger, what lesson would that have taught your neighbors? Or your kids? Gary blinked, surprised. You have kids? Two, Malcolm said, glancing toward the open window where Angela waved from the kitchen. And I want them to see what grace looks like. Not just power. Gary nodded slowly, emotion catching in his throat. You're a better man than I've been lately. Malcolm shrugged lightly. I've just had more practice. Then he extended his hand. Let's start over. Gary hesitated, not out of resistance but out of shame, before finally shaking it. The mayor's grip was firm but kind, and for the first time, Gary felt the weight lift from his chest. Welcome to the neighborhood, Malcolm said. For real this time. As Gary turned to leave, Malcolm added, Oh, and Mr. Whitman, next Sunday I'm hosting a barbecue for the whole block. You and your wife should come. There'll be music. Gary smiled nervously. Jazz? Malcolm grinned. You're learning. That afternoon, the sound of Louis Armstrong filled Maple Lane again. But this time, when Gary heard it, he didn't flinch. He smiled. And in that moment, the same song that once divided a street now carried something new through the air. Forgiveness. The next Sunday arrived with the smell of grilled corn, barbecue sauce, and freshly cut grass drifting through the neighborhood. For the first time in years, the usually quiet cul-de-sac of Brookfield Estates was alive. Laughter, chatter, and the warm hum of community. Children ran through sprinklers, couples mingled on lawns, and folding tables covered with home-cooked dishes stretched from one driveway to the next. It had been Mayor Malcolm Brooks's idea, but everyone had pitched in. The Andersons brought coleslaw. The Lees made peach cobbler. Even Gary Whitman, who, a week ago, had called the cops on Malcolm, showed up with a cooler full of sodas and a nervous smile. Angela Brooks stood near the grill, handing out paper plates. Malcolm, you've officially made Brookfield smell better than a state fair, she teased. Malcolm laughed. I figured food's the easiest way to get people talking. And it worked. The same neighbors who used to glance at each other from a distance were now laughing, swapping recipes, and sharing stories about their kids and jobs. A few even complimented the mayor's playlist. The same smooth jazz that once sparked complaints now played softly through outdoor speakers, blending with the sound of laughter. Gary lingered by the food table, uncertain if he belonged. Finally, he walked over to Malcolm, who was flipping burgers with one hand and shaking hands with new neighbors with the other. I need a hand? Gary asked, his tone humble. Malcolm smiled. You can handle the tongs? Gary chuckled, relieved by the humor. Barely, but I'll try. For a few minutes, they stood side by side, two men who, days ago, had been enemies, separated by prejudice, now grilling ribs together like old friends. As they worked, a group of kids ran by, laughing and chasing each other with water balloons. One of them, a little black boy with bright eyes, accidentally splashed Gary. He froze, expecting anger. But Gary just laughed, wiping his shirt. You got me good, kiddo, Malcolm grinned. That's my son, Jordan. He's got an arm, doesn't he? Gary smiled at the boy, then back at Malcolm. He does. You should sign him up for baseball. I plan to, Malcolm said. Maybe I'll need a coach. Gary blinked. You'd trust me with that? Malcolm nodded without hesitation. Trust has to start somewhere. Across the lawn, the HOA president, who'd once insisted on maintaining neighborhood standards, stood with a plate of ribs, laughing at a joke told by one of the teenagers. Even the older residents, the ones who'd once quietly approved of Gary's complaint, were now enjoying the music, tapping their feet to the rhythm. As the evening sun dipped low, Malcolm took a moment to look around. The street glowed golden, the air filled with the smell of food and the sound of genuine joy. For the first time since he moved in, everyone was together. No barriers, no tension, just neighbors. He turned to Angela, who was watching from the porch, and said softly, You see that? She nodded. You didn't just move into this neighborhood, she said. You changed it. Malcolm exhaled slowly, the weight of the week finally lifting. Maybe we all did, he said. Later that night, when most people had gone home, Gary stayed behind to help clean up. They packed chairs, stacked dishes, and folded tables under the porch light. Malcolm, Gary said finally, his voice quieter now. Thank you. for giving me another chance. Malcolm smiled. You earned it. Most people never even try. Gary looked down, humbled. I won't forget that. Good, Malcolm said, clapping him on the shoulder. Now, next time, you're hosting. I'm bringing the music. Gary laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in a long while. Deal. As he walked back home under the dim glow of the streetlights, the last few notes of jazz floated softly through the night. And for once in Brookfield Estates, nobody called it noise.